Hi guys, I'm Josh and welcome back to the Bonsai-En YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk a little bit about development and why it's so important. So stick around if you've got a tree like this and you want to make it one of those big trees that you see on the internet. Now development is one of the most underused techniques that I see in beginner bonsai. It's one of those things that people don't really understand at first, but once they do understand it, it opens all new doorways to them. They can create bigger and better trees, and they can stop wasting time on the little stuff that they're working on, because when everybody gets a bonsai, they buy something like I just showed you. And I think probably the number one question that I've seen about material like that is, what's my next move? Do I prune it? When do I prune it? And you will see people giving some answers, but the only real right answer is, if you want that tree to stay like that and you're happy with that tree, just leave it. If you're wanting a bigger and better bonsai, you're wanting to grow it into the trees that you might see on the internet, some of the bigger trees that are out there, then you need to learn development. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Before I get too far in, I just want to let you guys know that we have a new international store now. It's www.bonsaimerch.com. That's BONSAIMERCH.com. Now this website is just full of like t-shirts, hoodies, backpacks, stickers, phone cases, all with bonsai designs. This shop is basically to help support the YouTube channel. So rather than asking for donations, we've started a new shop. And if you guys shop with that, you'll help support us, plus you'll get some cool merchandise. We're going to look at updating the designs pretty regularly. So the more you guys buy on there, the more designs we can put up and the cooler products we can get. We have some new products coming up there soon, so keep an eye out. Now let's get to it. Now the first thing we need to do when we're doing anything in bonsai is we need to ask ourselves why. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? If we don't understand why, then we shouldn't really be applying a certain technique. So you need to know why you're wanting to develop your tree. And I would say 99% of the time that answer is, I want a bigger tree. I want a thicker trunk. I want nicer branching. I don't want to stick in a pot anymore. And that's why we would develop. So that kind of answers our next question, is your tree at its desired thickness? Now, there are bonsai nurseries out there that sell nursery stock, and it's pretty much developed and ready to go. They've done all the first steps for you. You can buy material like that, and it's ready for refinement. You may have to do a few little things to it, but it's most of the way there. But if you've bought small stock, even something that's, a little bit bigger, it still needs development. If you want to take a trunk from something like this to this, you need to develop. So the next thing we need to do is find out how to develop a tree. Now there's two ways to do this. We can put the tree in a bigger container, or we can put the tree in the ground. Now we need to learn a little bit of science here as to how and why this development process works, and why it's not good to do this in a bonsai pot. Now I'm going to come around to the other side of the board here, so you may see the back of my head for a little while, but I need to draw some diagrams for you guys just to make it easier so you can understand. Alright, so when we're developing a tree, if we've got a tree in a bonsai pot, so a nice little shallow pot like this, we've got our soil surface, and say we've got our little trunk like this. We've got some little branches here and there. We've got our canopy. Sorry about my awful drawing, I'm not an artist whatsoever. Now, what's happening here that is stopping your tree from developing? Basically, you may have heard this before, but whatever's happening in your root system is mirrored on top of the tree. Now, this is why a lot of professionals out there will, push the importance of a healthy root system. So what we mean by this, so you've got this tree in this bonsai pot. As your roots start to grow, they don't really have a lot of room to grow. That may be in your bonsai pot there. So what happens is when this tree becomes pot bound, because it hasn't got very much room for its roots to grow, the tree basically slows right down. Because if your roots are growing, then your tree is growing. You need to understand this. This is why we put trees that are going into refinement into bonsai pots, because basically what we're wanting to do is slow down the growth of the tree now, and we want to create smaller, finer growth. And that's what the bonsai pot does. That's what the bonsai pot allows us to do. But if we want this tree to get thicker, we need to give these roots more room to grow. So if we were to put this in a black plastic grow container, now look what happens. Our roots can grow. They keep growing. Thus, the tree keeps growing, getting thicker. And then your branches are getting thicker. That's basically what's happening there. Now, there's something else that helps this. It's not all just about the pot. We need to also look at our soil medium. Now, this is really important. Why is this important? So we're talking about our root system again, and we're talking about what happens in your root system is mirrored on top of your tree. So, if we've got really coarse material like akadama, pumice, lava, and all that kind of stuff that you always hear from professionals and everybody on the internet, that's the soil you should be using. That is true if you are in refinement, if you are in a bonsai pot. If we want to develop a tree, make it thicker, and get it to where it needs to be, we need to use more organic materials. We need to make that mix a lot less coarse. We need to make it so that the roots grow a lot thicker. So once your roots grow a lot thicker in stuff like coarse river sand and pine bark, peat, all those kind of things, once your roots start to grow thicker, then everything else on the tree starts to grow thicker. You want your roots to do two things in development. You want them to elongate and you want them to thicken. So by having that less coarse soil mix in your grow container, that allows your roots to thicken and elongate, and we get that mirrored effect on top of the tree. So that's why we do that. Now, the next thing we need to talk about here is our fertilizer that we use and the timing of it. Basically, in development, the timing is all year round, and we pump it full of fertilizer, especially nitrogen. Now, why nitrogen? Nitrogen is one of those things that promotes elongation. So if we're giving the tree lots of nitrogen, then we're getting the tree to elongate, our branches to elongate, and we're causing thickness in the first parts of the branches here. Now, don't worry about the whole branch thickening up, because later on we'll come back and we'll cut them back. So when you're in development, you need to worry less about making the tree look like a bonsai and worry more about thickening the trunk and thickening your first branches. And we're not worrying about our secondary branches or our tertiary branches. We're not worrying about them right now. All we're worrying about is the thickness of the trunk and the thickness of our first branches. So with the fertilizer, as I said, we want to be hitting it all year round. And the reason why you may hear other professionals talking about different types of fertilizer and different types of timing and, you know, tea bags and different application methods and liquids and, you know, organic fertilizers and all this kind of stuff, all the micronutrients and everything else you'll hear about fertilizer. This is basically all once we move into the bonsai pot. At this minute, we're just concentrating on thickening and elongating. So there's a few things that I probably should point out, that there's some differences between species, okay? I've got something else here, and that is growth, the type of growth that we will get while we're developing, which is going to be big and quite bushy on most things. If it's a leafy kind of tree, you're going to get big leaves, which is, you know, not particularly fantastic for bonsai, but at the moment we're not worrying about that. We'll worry about that once we move into refinement. But we need to ask ourselves, prune, yes or no? And as I said at the start of the video, this is something I hear a lot when people buy those little trees and they say, should I prune it? And that's where they have to ask themselves, are they happy with the size of that tree? If they're happy with the size of that tree, sure, prune it. Give it a little bit of a style, do what you can with it if you're happy with that. But if you're shooting for something bigger, no, don't prune. But that's not a blanket no. And what I mean by that is there are some cases where we would want to prune, so I'll point that out. Now, let's just say, for example, Japanese black pine. Let's say we're developing a black pine. All right, so we've got our trunk, we're letting it thicken, and then we've got, you know, branches coming off the tree. Everything's looking good. But suddenly further up the tree, we've got a branch here and a branch here. And this is exactly what's going to happen. You're going to get a ball of growth in that area, just here. It's going to swell because you've got bar branching. Now, you've probably heard the rule of 2. We take everything back to 2. In the situation where it comes to a trunk and first branching, your trunk is number 1. And then you can only choose one of these because we're only allowed 2. So we've got trunk is 1, and then one of these is 2. So in this case, if we were developing, we wouldn't want to leave both of these on there. We want to get one of them so we don't get that inverse taper in the trunk. We don't get that swelling. So we take this branch off. We've got 1, 2. That's our 2. We've gone back to 2, so that's okay. That's a case where it's okay to prune while we're developing. Otherwise, like a black pine, you want to keep as many of those needles as you possibly can on the tree, because the more needles you have, the more solar panels you have, and the more photosynthesis you're getting. The more photosynthesis you're getting, the more sugars and starches, the more water mobility, the tree's going to grow thicker. That's the way that it works. So just remember, you don't want to be pruning for styling purposes while you're developing. You only want to be pruning for strategic purposes. Say if you've got a bar branch, you don't want this swelling, we get rid of one branch. We keep what we can on the tree otherwise. This may be true for some other trees as well. Say we've got something like a tea tree. You know, here in Australia with most of our natives, this applies. And elsewhere, this would apply to any tree that is apically dominant. So, what we're going to talk about here is if we're growing a tree in development, and say you've got say you've started putting a bend in your tree and you've got a really nice branch that's coming off on that first bend, and you know that once you're finished developing, this is going to be a very useful branch to you. What can happen is if we've got a really apically dominant tree and we let it keep going and going and going, and we've got, you know, branches here, here, and then we've got a ton of growth on top of the tree, what's going to happen here is the tree is actually going to favour all this growth up on top here. And at some point, it's going to say, see you later to this bottom branch. It's going to drop it. So we have to be kind of strategic about keeping the top of the tree trimmed back while letting these branches run. So usually what that will look like on a tree is, if I do a smaller diagram here, you might see somebody developing a tree and they've got these really long bottom branches. And then up the top of the tree, everything's kept nice and short. And the apex is nice and little. But you've got these really long bottom branches. What that person is trying to achieve is thickening these bottom branches, keeping the top of the tree trimmed back so that they don't lose these branches. That way, once they've finished developing the tree, they can come back, they can cut back to here, they can cut back to here. They've got their nice thick branches here, and then they can start working on, you know, their secondary branching, tertiary branching, and start, you know, basically ramifying from there. But they've got their nice thick branches down here. That's what they're trying to achieve in that situation. So if you're ever seeing trees that have got really super long bottom branches, top's nice and trimmed back. I do it a lot with my tea trees, melaleucas, kunzias, those kinds of things. That's a really good thing to do. Now, the next thing we need to talk about is wiring. Now, do we wire a tree in development, or do we let it go? I think I may have said in the last part about the pruning that while we're in development, we're not going to worry about style. Now, that's true when it comes to the pruning, but when it comes to the trunk and the first branches, we need to wire while the tree is young. So if you've got a little whip, sorry, this pen's not fantastic. Say you've got a little whip and it's straight, we need to put some wire around that, and we need to bend it into position. That way, as the tree grows, it'll grow into that shape. Same with your first branches. You need to wire some shape into your first branches. That way, as they thicken, you've already got the shape in them. If you just let the tree grow naturally and wild, what you're going to end up with is a trunk that's too thick to bend, and you're going to end up with first branches that are too thick to bend. So while we're concentrating on growing this trunk and growing out our first branches, we also want to concentrate on putting that shape into them. Now, when you're shaping, you know, something that's really thin, like your pinky finger, you really want to put dramatic bends in it. Now, I'm not saying to style your tree like this, but I'm saying instead of doing like really slight bends, you want to do really exaggerated ones. Because what happens, as the tree grows into that, it'll actually start to straighten out a little bit. So if you do really light bends, what will happen is the tree may grow out of those bends. But if you do really significant, exaggerated bends, then as the tree starts to straighten out a little bit, it's still going to have some really nice shape to it. So I would say yes to wiring while developing, but also keep an eye on it, especially during spring. During the growing season, the tree's going to grow quick, and you don't want too much wire by it. On things like junipers, black pines, Some of our Australian natives, like tea trees, kunzias that have got really corky bark, it's not so bad because it'll grow out really quickly, it'll heal, and sometimes it actually adds a bit of character to it, that wire bite, but you don't want it to bite too bad. Don't freak out if it does bite a little bit, because it's probably going to happen to all of us where we put the wire on, you know, we don't look at the tree for a little bit and go, oh, it's grown into the wire a bit too much. So yeah, shape up your tree, get it nice and thick, and you've already got your first shape in it. Then later on, when we come back, we can cut back and then we can start on our other stuff once we start to refine. Now, one other thing I want to talk about with development is as we're developing a tree, and this can even be true when you're trying to choose nursery stock that's been developed, we really want to concentrate on... This pen's completely dying on me now. We'll go to blue. We really want to concentrate on, first of all, we want to concentrate on this area. How wide is our base? Do we have any interesting roots coming off the base? You know, do we have like a really interesting nabari happening? You know, like your root flare, what's happening at the base of the trunk here. So that's one of the first areas that we want to look at. The second area we want to look at is, you know, the movement in the tree. Does it have good movement? So that's the second area we want to look at, movement. And then we also want to look at our first branching and anything that we can use in the design of the tree. Have we got branching in good places, like on the outside of our bends? Do we have good branches that we can use? And this is all the stuff that we're trying to develop before we go into a bonsai pot. We want to develop our base, we want to develop a nice thick trunk with some interesting movement, we want to develop our nice first branches. So when you're looking for nursery stock, you look for the same stuff. If you're wanting to buy this already done, don't go into a nursery and see one tree here and one tree here and go, I'm going to buy this one because it's bigger. When this one has a wider base, it has nicer root structure, it has nicer shape with nicer branching, when this one's just basically straight. That would be a mistake. We always want to go for the more interesting stuff. Once again, why we develop: thicken, movement, first branches. Once we're happy with the thickness of the tree, once we're happy with our base, once we're happy with the movement and the first branching, then we can move the tree into refinement and really start the work. And by this time, you know, this tree might have grown really tall, and then we decide we're going to come back and lop it off just there. You know, that's part of bonsai and the development process. You know, I've had people freak out when I've done this, but I get a nice big tree and it's nice and tall and it's got a lot on it, and then come home and just chop the top of it completely off. That's if the species can handle it. But what I might be doing there is saying, well, all that other stuff was just used for development. It was helping the tree get thicker. Now I want to bring it back down, make it more squat, short, you know, like a bonsai. And, you know, I've got my nice thick first branching. I might have cut that back to there. You know, might have cut that back to there. Now I can concentrate on growing some of my finer branches off here. But this isn't until the point where we put the tree into refinement. So that's where we start to, you know, see more of that bonsai-esque kind of style and design after the development process, after we move into a bonsai pot. That's why when we go into a bonsai pot, we may have this big root system, and then we squash it all back into this little pot. We slow down the growth of the tree now. We put a more coarse mix in. Once we put a more coarse mix in, your roots will get, once we cut all the thick roots back, once they grow again in that coarser mix, they'll grow finer, and they will also bifurcate. They'll split off into multiples. That'll be your root system. Rather than just a couple of big, long, thick roots, you're going to have this happen, and then you're going to get that effect on the top of the tree. And then we apply that all to the top of the tree, and we've got a beautiful looking bonsai that's been well developed. So I hope you guys can take something away from this. If you've got some small bonsai and you're looking at how to get them bigger, this is definitely the way to do it, development. Any questions you have, leave them in the comments below. Also let me know in the comments below, do you like the designs on the new website? Do you like the merchandise? Do you like the items that are on there, the backpacks and the phone cases, stickers, all that kind of stuff, the range of shirts, hoodies? Let us know if there's anything you'd like to see. And until next time, I'll see you later.